I'm a 28-year-old guy, the eldest in a family of four. My brother is 26, and if you asked anyone in the family about him, they'd call him the black sheep. While I've always been the one expected to handle responsibilities in emergencies, he's lived life on his own terms, bouncing between jobs, borrowing money, and coming up with one excuse after another about why things just didn't work out. Our parents, retired teachers in their mid-50s, have always supported him. No matter how many times he fell flat on his face, they'd pick him up, brush him off, and tell him it wasn't his fault. Me? I was the one they leaned on when things went south, the one expected to step up when bills needed paying or problems needed solving. I didn't mind it at first, family is family, right? But it started wearing thin, especially when my brother moved back in with them last year, citing financial troubles. 6 months ago, he packed up and left again. No real explanation, just something about needing space. I figured he'd crashed with a friend or found some cheap apartment, scraping by like he always did. But about a month ago, everything changed. We were having one of those routine family dinners at our parents' place, the kind where everyone pretends they're fine while avoiding the elephant in the room. My brother showed up late, which wasn't unusual, but what was unusual was the way he arrived. Instead of his beat-up old sedan, he pulled up in a brand new luxury car, the kind that cost more than my annual salary. He stepped out wearing designer clothes, a gold watch, and shoes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. When he walked in, all smiles and confidence, the room froze. My mom gasped, my dad's jaw dropped, and I just stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Before anyone could ask, he announced, "I finally made it." He didn't elaborate, but the way he handed my dad an envelope of cash and insisted on paying for dinner left everyone in awe, except me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Over the next few weeks, things only got stranger. His social media went from dead silence to full-on flexing. Pictures of him at high-end restaurants, lounging on yachts, attending exclusive events, all with vague captions about hard work paying off. It was so unlike him that even mutual friends started texting me, asking if he'd won the lottery or hit it big somehow. My parents, of course, were thrilled. For them, this was the moment they'd been waiting for, the prodigal son finally turning his life around. Mom couldn't stop talking about how proud she was, and Dad kept saying, I knew he had it in him. Meanwhile, I couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in his stories. He claimed to be in consulting but never offered any details about his job. When I casually asked about his clients or projects, he'd quickly change the subject or brush me off with a vague comment like, "You wouldn't understand." The generosity was also uncharacteristic. He started slipping money to our parents regularly, paying off small debts they'd accumulated over the years. On paper, it looked like he'd gone from broke to balling overnight. But how? One night, my mom pulled me aside. She said she was happy for him but admitted she was worried. "He's being so secretive," she whispered. "I just hope he's not involved in anything dangerous." When I suggested asking him directly, she shook her head. "Your father thinks I'm overreacting. He says we should just be proud of him." Dad, ever the optimist, seemed completely oblivious. When I brought up my doubts, he waved them off, saying, "He's just finally found his stride. Why can't you be happy for him?" I tried to drop it, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I mentioned his sudden wealth to one of his close friends, hoping they'd offer some insight. Instead, they got weirdly evasive, saying they hadn't seen him much lately. That was another red flag. My brother was always social. If his friends didn't know what he was up to, then who did? The final straw came at another family dinner. It was one of those gatherings where everyone was in high spirits, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was overthinking things. But then my brother stood up, raised his glass, and said something that sent a chill down my spine. Things are going to change for all of us soon. The way he said it, with a mix of excitement and secrecy, made the hairs on my neck stand up. My parents clapped and cheered, assuming it was good news. I wasn't so sure. Something about the whole situation felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was involved in wasn't as harmless as he wanted us to believe. Looking back, that moment was the spark. It was the moment I realized I couldn't ignore the warning signs any longer. My brother's transformation wasn't just a glow up, it was a complete 180, and I was determined to find out how he pulled it off. I just didn't know yet how far down the rabbit hole I'd have to go, or how much it would cost all of us. Update 1. After that dinner where my brother made his cryptic toast about things changing for all of us, the tension in our family started to build. My parents, thrilled by his sudden success, started leaning into his generosity. He'd stop by unannounced, dropping off envelopes of cash, insisting it was no big deal. My mom was over the moon. Finally, she said, he was stepping up as the son she always believed he could be. My dad, who was always skeptical of handouts from anyone, didn't protest either. The money spoke louder than my concerns. One day, I overheard my mom on the phone with a friend. She casually mentioned that my brother had deposited a large sum directly into their account to help pay off lingering bills. She said it like it was a badge of honor, proof that he had turned his life around. But all I could think was, where is all this money coming from? I tried to bring it up with them one evening after dinner. I pointed out the obvious, that he had gone from struggling to afford gas money to flashing luxury cars and designer suits practically overnight. My mom dismissed it, saying he was working hard and finally getting what he deserved. My dad just waved me off, calling me paranoid. When I pressed harder, my mom got defensive, accusing me of being jealous. "He's your brother," she said. "Why can't you just be happy for him?" The next family dinner was a disaster. I brought up my concerns directly to my brother this time, asking him point blank how he'd managed to make so much money so quickly. He laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Then, with this smug smile, he said I wouldn't understand because I was too stuck in the 9-to-5 grind. When I pushed harder, he stood up, tossed his napkin on the table, and told me to stop acting like I was entitled to an explanation. Before storming out, he said something I'll never forget: "You'll all regret doubting me." That was the turning point. My parents started pressuring me to apologize. They said I'd embarrassed the family and hurt my brother's feelings for no reason. They even suggested I was making drama because I couldn't stand seeing him succeed. Meanwhile, my brother started pulling away. He stopped coming to family gatherings, ignored my calls, and began distancing himself even from our parents, which only made them more defensive of him. Frustrated, I turned to my best friend for advice. She listened quietly as I vented about the situation. When I finished, she just leaned back and said, "Hire a private investigator." At first, I thought it was overkill. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If he was really involved in something illegal, this might be the only way to find out without tipping him off. Before hiring anyone, I decided to do some digging myself. I started with public records, trying to see if he had registered any businesses or filed taxes under a new company. Nothing came up. I checked social media again, combing through his posts and tagged photos for clues. Most of it was just the same, lavish outings, high-end meals, and flashy captions. It was all surface level, no substance. Then, out of nowhere, I got an anonymous message on one of my accounts. It simply said, "Your brother is in deep trouble. Be careful." No context, no explanation, nothing. I tried replying, but whoever sent it didn't respond. It was enough to push me over the edge. I called a PI the next day. While waiting for updates, more red flags started popping up. My aunt, who's never been one to hold back her opinions, called me one evening, furious. She said my brother had approached her and a few cousins with some investment opportunity. She described it as sounding like a pyramid scheme and claimed he'd gotten angry when she refused to give him money. That made me wonder, was he running out of cash? Was this why he'd started targeting family? Around this time, my brother started showing up with someone new, a much older partner who looked like they had serious money. I saw them once at a family event. They barely spoke to anyone, sitting off to the side, checking their phone the entire time. My brother seemed almost nervous around them, like he was trying too hard to impress. It was weird, but no one else seemed to notice. As the days went on, my brother became even more distant. He stopped answering my parents' calls entirely, which only made them more anxious. My mom confided that she was starting to worry again, but every time I tried to push the issue, she shut me down, saying it wasn't my business. Then, one evening, my PI called. He'd found something big. Apparently, my brother wasn't just living large. He was living in a luxury condo leased under someone else's name. The PI said there were whispers of offshore accounts and connections to questionable business dealings. It wasn't solid proof, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Whatever he was involved in wasn't above board. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just the beginning. Update 2. The private investigator's initial findings were unsettling enough. My brother was living in a high-end condo, but it wasn't in his name. The lease was under some corporation tied to offshore accounts, which raised a big red flag. When I asked the PI if this could mean money laundering, he didn't confirm or deny it, but he did say the setup looked suspicious. That was enough for me to confront my brother directly. The next time he came over to visit my parents, I waited for him outside. I laid out everything, the condo, the offshore connections, and how none of it added up. He didn't even flinch. He accused me of snooping and crossing boundaries, then said I didn't know what I was talking about. Before I could press further, he got in his car and drove off. Around the same time, the PI dug up more on the person my brother had been seen with, the older partner who always seemed a bit too controlling. They weren't just wealthy, they were infamous in certain circles. This person had a history of fraud allegations spanning years, including Ponzi schemes and fake investment opportunities. The moment I shared this with my parents, they refused to listen. My mom called it a coincidence, and my dad told me I was obsessed with tearing my brother down. Not long after, a mutual friend of ours reached out to me privately. He admitted that months ago, my brother had approached him with a cryptocurrency investment opportunity. According to him, it sounded too good to be true, so he declined. Apparently, my brother had been pitching this deal to several people in our circle, promising massive returns. Now, I was beginning to see a pattern. Then came the shocker. I overheard my mom talking to my dad about a loan they had taken against their home. She mentioned how my brother convinced them it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get in on something big. He had reassured them it was completely safe, and they believed him. Hearing this felt like a gut punch. My parents had spent decades working as teachers and saving every penny for retirement, and now, they'd gambled it on whatever scheme my brother had sold them. I wasn't the only one catching on. Some of my cousins, who had always supported my brother in the past, started pulling away after he approached them for money. One of them even called me to vent, saying he'd been pressured to invest but had refused. Word spread quickly within the family, and soon enough, everyone was whispering about whether my brother was involved in something shady. My parents defended him at every turn, insisting he was just misunderstood and that people were jealous of his success. As if things weren't bad enough, I received a text from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging into your brother's life, or you'll regret it." That was all. No name, no context. At first, I thought it might be some kind of prank, but the timing was too perfect to ignore. I saved the message and blocked the number, but it only fueled my determination. I decided to push for a family meeting to address everything once and for all. My parents reluctantly agreed, and I reached out to my brother, but he refused to show up. He said he didn't owe anyone an explanation and hung up. Without him there, the meeting turned into a shouting match between me and my parents. They accused me of trying to tear the family apart, while I begged them to open their eyes. Around this time, rumors started circulating that my brother's wealth wasn't as solid as it seemed. A mutual acquaintance told me he had been selling off some of his assets, small things at first, like expensive electronics, but then larger items like jewelry and watches. It was clear something was wrong, but my parents refused to see it. Then, one evening, my mom called me in tears. The bank had contacted them about their loan. They were behind on payments, and if they didn't catch up soon, they could lose the house. When I asked if my brother had been helping them, she admitted he hadn't sent money in weeks. Instead, he'd been avoiding their calls altogether. The final straw came when I reviewed some of the documents related to their loan. My mom had sent me a scan of one of the papers, hoping I could help figure out what was going on. That's when I saw it, my name, listed as a cosigner. Except I'd never signed anything. My brother had forged my signature. I stared at the document, unable to believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just shady anymore. It was criminal. I knew I had to act, but the weight of what that meant for my family was crushing. If I pressed charges, it could destroy what little was left of our family's trust. But if I didn't, I'd be letting him get away with ruining our parents' lives and putting mine at risk. For now, I've started consulting with a lawyer. I don't know what the next steps are, but one thing is clear. My brother has crossed a line, and there's no coming back from this. Update 3. After discovering my name was forged on the loan documents, I had no choice but to file a fraud report. I went to the bank with the paperwork, laid everything out, and officially reported my brother. The look on the manager's face when they saw the forged signature told me I wasn't the first person dealing with something like this. They assured me they would investigate, but they also warned me that this was now a legal matter. When my parents found out, all hell broke loose. They were furious, accusing me of betraying the family. My mom said I was ruining my brother's life, while my dad claimed I was acting out of jealousy. No amount of reasoning would get through to them. I tried explaining that I had no choice. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was criminal. They didn't care. After the report was filed, the bank took swift action. They froze the loan, flagged the account, and informed the authorities. My brother, meanwhile, completely ghosted me. He blocked my number, ignored my emails, and disappeared from every form of contact. My parents said he wasn't responding to them either, but I wasn't sure if I believed them. Word spread quickly through the extended family. Somehow, my parents twisted the story to make it sound like I was the villain. Relatives started calling, texting, and even showing up at my door to harass me. One of my aunts told me I was destroying the family's reputation, while a cousin accused me of being the reason our parents were struggling. It felt like everyone was against me. Then came the desperation. A mutual friend reached out to let me know my brother had started asking people for cash loans. He told them it was a temporary setback and promised to pay them back with interest. Apparently, he was so convincing that at least one person agreed. When I heard this, I knew his empire was crumbling. If he was resorting to borrowing money, the flashy lifestyle was just smoke and mirrors. The private investigator wasn't done either. They uncovered more about my brother's business dealings, including a shell company tied to a notorious scam ring. This wasn't just small-time fraud. It was part of a larger operation. The PI handed over everything they found to me, and I passed it along to the authorities. Even with all this evidence piling up, my parents refused to believe any of it. They insisted he was innocent, claiming I was being manipulated by outside influences. They downplayed everything, saying my brother would explain it all if I just gave him a chance. I wanted to believe them, but every new piece of information proved otherwise. One night, my mom finally admitted they were struggling financially. The loan payments were overwhelming, and they were dipping into their retirement savings just to stay afloat. She broke down, saying they had handed over their life savings to my brother for a no-risk investment. That was the moment I realized how deep his manipulation ran. He hadn't just taken advantage of me, he'd exploited everyone who trusted him. A week later, I spotted my brother's wealthy partner at a cafe downtown. I didn't plan on confronting them, but when they saw me, they looked uncomfortable and tried to leave. I blocked their path and asked about their connection to my brother. They smirked and told me they had no idea what I was talking about before walking away. It was clear they wanted nothing to do with the mess. Things escalated when I found an anonymous letter in my mailbox. The note was simple but chilling: back off or face the consequences. It wasn't signed, and there were no clues about who sent it. I showed it to the PI, who advised me to be cautious but didn't think it warranted immediate action. I wasn't so sure. At this point, I consulted a lawyer. They reviewed the forged loan documents, the PI's findings, and the harassment I was experiencing. Their advice was clear: protect myself financially and emotionally. They suggested I distance myself from my parents for now and focus on resolving the legal side of things. Interestingly, my younger sister, 21, reached out to me during all this. She said she'd noticed our brother acting off for months and had her own suspicions. She sided with me, saying someone needed to hold him accountable. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like I wasn't entirely alone in this. Then came the rumors. A neighbor told my parents they'd heard my brother was under investigation for financial crimes. It wasn't confirmed, but the possibility was enough to cause panic. My mom called me, crying and begging me to drop the fraud report, saying it would destroy him if the investigation led to anything serious. I stood my ground, reminding her that he had already destroyed trust in the family. As the days passed, the cracks in my brother's world became more visible. His social media was wiped clean. No more yachts, no more luxury dinners, no more expensive cars. Mutual friends started whispering about how he was laying low. It felt like the beginning of the end, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were going to get worse before they got better. For now, I'm waiting to see what happens next. The bank investigation is ongoing, and I know the authorities are looking into the shell company. My lawyer is handling the legal side, but the fallout within the family feels impossible to fix. My brother may have cut me off, but the damage he's done is still unfolding, and I'm bracing for whatever comes next. Update 4. It all came crashing down in a way that no one in the family could have anticipated. Early one morning, I got a call from the private investigator. My brother's condo had been raided by authorities. He'd been arrested for his involvement in a large-scale cryptocurrency scam, and the story was already breaking in the local news. The PI didn't mince words. This is big. Your brother isn't just a small fish, he's tied to a much larger operation. By the time I turned on the TV, the headlines were everywhere. Reports said my brother was part of an international scam ring that had defrauded hundreds of people. His condo, car, and other flashy assets were all seized by law enforcement, confirming they'd been purchased with scam money. They showed footage of the raid, with him being led out in handcuffs, looking dazed but defiant. When my parents saw the news, they were devastated. My mom kept repeating that it had to be a misunderstanding, that someone must have set him up. My dad was silent, staring at the screen as if he couldn't process what was happening. They clung to the hope that this was some kind of mistake, even as the evidence piled up. For me, it was bittersweet. On one hand, I felt vindicated. The extended family, who had been quick to accuse me of destroying our family's reputation, started reaching out to apologize. Some admitted they doubted my brother's story all along but hadn't wanted to stir the pot. Despite the apologies, tensions remained high. It's hard to undo the kind of damage that accusations and betrayal can cause. As more details emerged, the scale of the scam became clear. My brother and his associates had been running a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme, promising massive returns on investments that didn't exist. The money he'd flaunted, the lifestyle he'd shown off, it was all funded by the savings of people who trusted him. The authorities seized everything, his luxury car, the condo, even smaller assets like electronics and designer clothes. It turned out he hadn't owned most of it outright. The leases and loans tied to these items were part of the scam, designed to make him appear more successful than he was. For my parents, the fallout was even worse. The bank had been relentless about the unpaid loan on their house, and with my brother's accounts frozen, there was no way for them to keep up with the payments. I learned they were weeks away from foreclosure. My mom finally admitted they'd handed over their life savings to my brother for his investment opportunity, leaving them with nothing. Watching them face the consequences of his lies was gut-wrenching, but there was nothing I could do to fix it. As for the mysterious partner my brother had been seen with, they disappeared overnight. No one could track them down, and the rumors started swirling. Some said they'd fled the country, others speculated they'd cut ties with my brother to avoid being implicated. The authorities mentioned this partner during the investigation but didn't release much information. All I knew was that they were gone, leaving my brother to deal with the fallout alone. Through legal channels, my brother started confessing bits and pieces of what had happened. He claimed he'd been coerced into the scam, saying he'd been desperate to provide for the family and thought this was his only option. Whether or not that was true didn't matter, he still chose to get involved, and the damage was done. I debated whether to visit him in jail. Part of me felt obligated as his sibling, but another part of me couldn't forget the lies, the manipulation, and the way he'd used our family as pawns in his schemes. In the end, I decided against it. I needed to focus on putting my life back together. The fallout from the arrest spread to the entire family. Our community, which had once admired my parents for their integrity and hard work, now looked at them with a mix of pity and judgment. Some blamed them for enabling my brother, saying they should have seen the signs. Others gossiped about the scandal, turning it into a cautionary tale. My parents retreated into themselves, refusing to speak to me unless I agreed to drop the fraud charges. I couldn't. What he did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. My younger sister moved in with me around this time. She said she couldn't handle the denial anymore, and it was clear she needed a break from the chaos. Having her around was a relief. It reminded me that not everyone in the family was against me. The extended family held a meeting to decide whether to help my parents financially. They invited me, but I declined. I'd done everything I could to protect myself from my brother's mess, and I wasn't about to put myself back into that drama. From what I heard, the meeting ended in arguments, with no one agreeing on how to proceed. The stress of everything began to take a toll on my health. I started losing sleep, skipping meals, and avoiding social interactions. Eventually, I decided to start therapy. It helped me process everything, the betrayal, the guilt, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility I'd carried for so long. Finally, the bank investigation came to a close. They cleared my name of any liability for the forged loan, which was a huge relief. It didn't fix everything, but it was a step toward rebuilding my life. As for my brother, his trial is still pending. He faces multiple charges, and the evidence against him is overwhelming. My parents remain in denial, holding on to the hope that he'll somehow walk away from this unscathed. I've come to terms with the fact that we may never fully reconcile. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. Update 5. It's been months since my brother's arrest, and life has changed in ways I never imagined. His trial wrapped up recently, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with restitution requirements for the victims of the scam. The judge made it clear his actions caused real harm, and he needed to face the consequences. Watching the verdict come down was surreal. It felt like the final chapter in a book one never wanted to read. The fallout for my parents was just as harsh. Unable to keep up with the loan payments, they lost the house. A sympathetic relative took them in, offering a small spare room to live in while they figured out their next steps. Instead of blaming my brother for their situation, they doubled down on blaming me. According to them, if I hadn't filed the fraud report or involved the authorities, none of this would have happened. It's exhausting, but I've learned to let it go. Therapy has helped with that. Speaking of therapy, it's been a game changer. For a long time, I carried the weight of guilt, wondering if I could have prevented this mess if I had stepped in earlier. My therapist helped me see that my brother's choices were his own, and I wasn't responsible for fixing his mistakes. I've also learned to set boundaries, especially with my parents. Their refusal to accept the truth means our relationship remains strained, but I've stopped letting their opinions control my life. Meanwhile, my younger sister has been thriving since moving in with me. She landed a stable job and has been saving up to eventually move out on her own. Watching her grow into her independence has been one of the few bright spots in this whole ordeal. We've built a stronger bond, supporting each other as we try to move forward. In the community, the gossip has died down. At first, people couldn't stop talking about the scandal. Some pitied my parents, others judged them for enabling my brother. Over time, though, new dramas took their place, and the whispers faded. While the family name is still associated with the scam, it's no longer the main topic of conversation. Financially, I'm finally finding my footing again. Sorting out the mess my brother caused took months, but I've started to rebuild. I've learned to be more cautious, taking steps to protect myself from future betrayals. One unexpected moment of closure came when one of my brother's scam victims reached out. They'd heard about my role in exposing the operation and wanted to thank me. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. The letters from my brother started arriving about a month into his sentence. They're a mix of blame and pleas for forgiveness. In one, he accused me of destroying his life. In another, he apologized and said he wanted to make amends. It's hard to tell what's genuine and what's manipulation. For now, I've chosen not to respond. My focus is on healing, not reopening old wounds. My parents, however, remain deeply entangled in his narrative. They visit him in prison regularly and send him money when they can. My sister tells me he started showing signs of remorse but still manipulates them with promises of a better future once he's out. It's hard to watch them cling to hope when the pattern is so clear. Extended family remains divided. Some have come around to my side, admitting they were wrong to doubt me. Others still side with my parents, believing I overreacted and caused unnecessary damage. I've stopped trying to change their minds. At this point, I'm more focused on moving forward than rehashing the past. One of the most significant steps I've taken is pursuing a passion project I'd put off during all the family drama. It's something I've always wanted to do, but the chaos of the last few years made it impossible. Now, with more clarity and peace in my life, I've thrown myself into it. It's been a rewarding experience, giving me a sense of purpose and a fresh start. My brother's actions created fractures in the family that may never fully heal. My parents have tentatively reached out, but their refusal to take accountability for their role in enabling him keeps our relationship distant. It's a sad reality, but one I've come to accept. In the end, I've realized that the family dynamic I once hoped for might never exist. The betrayal, the lies, and the fallout have left scars that time may not fully erase. But I've also gained something invaluable: independence, clarity, and a stronger sense of self. For the first time in a long time, I'm at peace with where I am. This chapter of my life may be closing, but I'm finally ready to write the next one.